All right, East Coast, West Coast. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a
It's
pleasure to be
great.
here.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to see you. Home to home from California to New York, not Jersey. You said, right? New York.
Exactly. It's New
um,
York. Yes.
I really look forward to this conversation because there's a lot of points that are really important to me and what's going on, I think, right now. But I'd love you to introduce yourself, semi-formally, if you will, and a little bit about your background to start.
hmm Yeah. So just, as a little bit. So currently my role is as a senior advisor in a group called the Board Leadership Center, which is part of the audit and accounting firm KPMG. And essentially what we do is we're a quasi think tank, quasi advisor, educator on board governance issues. So board effectiveness, some of the issues that I know we're going to get into talking about, board diversity, how boards are overseeing risk and ESG, and various other issues. But really everything all about corporate boards and how they can provide the best possible oversight to their companies. And before that, I was, still am a lawyer, not practicing anymore, but before that I was practicing as primarily an in-house lawyer. Started out very briefly in a law firm, but quickly went into the food industry. And went through various snack products. Was the cookie lawyer at Nabisco, and then when Nabisco was acquired by Kraft, I became the chief counsel for what then became the snacks division of Kraft Foods, which after I left became what's now called Mondelez. Then after that, I moved from cookies to chocolate and was the Global Deputy General Counsel and Chief Governance Officer at Hershey for just under 10 years, and then moved from there to KPMG.
And that, I believe, is that where you met my partner, Ed Martin?
It is. It is. We met when I was a lawyer, and Ed walked into my office and said, I have this idea, it's going to save the world, but I'm really worried that legal isn't going to approve it. And we became fast friends from then on because it did get approved.
All right, thank goodness. Otherwise, who knows what could happen?
Exactly.
The fork in the road, that was a key fork in the road for all this. That's incredible. I'll have to share that with him again. Well, you kind of answered this question a little bit, but I like to go into it further. People have their whys, their whats, and all that, and all important. But why do you do what you do?
Yeah. So, I think I did sort of allude to it. And frankly, if you take Ed's story as an example, that is why I do what I do, because a lot of lawyers would have said, no, it's not, sort of within the structure and framework of a company does. So, it's being able to use creativity to come up with ways to get to yes in, of course, a compliant way. And then also the educational piece is really, really important. And when I mean education, it's in a slightly different way than, classroom training. So let me give you another example. When I first got to Hershey, I was working on their ethics program, and looked through the code of conduct, which great piece of work, but it had been written in the 90s, and their anti-discrimination provisions didn't include anything that said that they would not discriminate against people on the basis of sexual orientation. So I went to the CEO and I said, I want to put this in. And he said, yeah, of course, go ahead. And that was how this company had something that they'd never had before. And, to this day, it's obviously something that is deep into what they care about. But at the time, I think of it as education because no one was opposed to it, but no one really thought about it. And I find myself in the position over and over and over again, particularly in the board world, of being able to do things like that can make a difference because you've got good people that are open and receptive, but they just haven't really thought about the specific issue that you're talking to them about. And that's my why. That's what keeps me doing what I do, frankly.
Yeah, that's actually brilliant and so relevant to what is going on right now in everything about. I mean, even the stuff of that people don't know about, or maybe just pass by in a pharmacy of all the cosmetics or the skincare products for African Americans are locked up.
Right.
How does that make people feel? And maybe we saw it, but we didn't even notice.
Exactly.
Pretty
And it's you know, I mean, you talk about it as being brilliant, but it's actually really easy because I'm not, I find people that are open to it,
mm-hmm.
and then it's a quick conversation and it's done.
Isn't that the key though? Is that instead of being so busy, why don't we listen a little bit?
Yeah.
And we'll learn something. I had a partner in Deloitte that was one of my influencers, and he said, "Brilliance is simple." He said, "It might not be easy, but it's simple." You just you kind of look for it. So a little bit, you've kind of answered this a little bit too, and we talked about a little bit other times about it's taken decades. Like no one just gets famous in 2 minutes. It's taken decades for corporate leaders to finally realize aligning with social impact actually is good for business, right? It's critical for getting talent now because young people especially only want to work with leaders who care about this type of stuff. They're who they are and then what's going on in the world. So with your background, global companies, professional service, KPMG, in the realm of counsel, which as you said, a lot of times is about not the creativity towards the yes, as you put it really good, but it's like, what are all the risks that we shouldn't do it, basically? So I call this a push question. So what truly differentiates you as a leader who cares?
You said it. I'm brilliant, but I'll take that one. But no, yeah, right. you can edit that out. No, I think it's the interestingly the background in consumer products, because it's really opened my eyes. So I've been in the consumer world for a really long time, and just to give another example, for part of that, I was on the board of the Council of Better Business Bureaus, and the Council of Better Business Bureaus. I think as everyone knows, if you want a local locksmith or a local plumber or this and that, there's a lot of other pieces to it. It's actually quite global, but it's also got this very local piece. And what it does, and it started to do it, I think it's well over 100 years now, probably 125 years, is exactly what we're talking about. Because in their brilliance, what they did is they said, we want consumers to be able to identify companies that care in all of their interactions. And so there's a set of standards that they had set up. And I say all of this based on, my knowledge from last time I was involved with them, which was a few years ago, but at least at the time, and I believe that's still true today. There's a set of standards, one of which says, I will tell the truth in what I tell consumers that my product or service is going to deliver, which again seems obvious, but it's not something to be taken for granted with a lot of companies. And number two, if a consumer has a problem with something I've delivered, I agree that I will abide by, and there's a sort of a set of processes to go through to resolve it. And so it's this commitment to consumers and this almost badge, if you will, but something that identifies these companies to say, we are good companies. And what makes us good is we've agreed to, a commitment. And so, I've seen that in small companies through the Better Business Bureau Council. I've seen it in large companies through all of my work, both in-house previously and now in work with boards. And so I know how it can work well. And I know the pitfalls of what can happen when it doesn't work well.
And yet brilliance is simple, because you would think if you're open with consumers and made a mistake or there's something happened or whatnot, and you listen and you do something. I always compare it to a coach or a boss. If the player makes a mistake on the field or the ice and comes to the bench, the coach yells at him and benches him and says, you suck, basically. Or says, let's talk about what you did wrong. This is wrong, this is wrong. Now get out there, we really need you. Type of thing. Your best return on investment is keeping that person and taking care of that, basically. It's not even that brilliant.
It's not. It's really just common sense. But that's absolutely right. Yeah.
So do you see then? My grandparents were super wise, and they would always say, I'm sure maybe your grandparents too, that with a Kiev accent, they would say, "As long as you have your health, that's the most important thing." Right? But it wasn't a line. That was for real for them.
Yeah.
Because of everything they've gone through, your health is the number one thing. So we got technology changing like crazy. You got COVID. We thought we had the biggest thing in the world happening there, which it was, because the whole world shut down. But then you got the right thing of finally racial injustice taking on too. I'm not sure what else we can take on at the same time. But what you're talking about is kind of like a little bit of an awakening, because people are seeing things, listening, having time. And I wonder what your thoughts are more about what our awareness is now going to be at work, at home, in our community, like between each other.
Yeah, so I think we're at a tipping point. And there's companies that have forever been aware of these issues. So if you look at, Nike is always raised as an example. Has a predominantly or very heavily African-American consumer base. They've taken risks that other companies are now saying, oh, wow, maybe that's not so much of a risk. Maybe that's actually something that is good business, no matter who my consumer base is. So that's on the one hand. Something like a Ben & Jerry's, which on the consumer side has always just put stakeholders first. So let me back up for a minute and talk about one of the things that arguably has really changed, at least in the US, is this whole concept of stakeholder capitalism. Mm-hmm. So if you go back to the old days of Milton Friedman, who is attributed to saying that, really the only thing that matters is profit for the shareholders. There's actually some dispute about whether he really said that or meant it in that way. But that's how, he's always quoted as, well, Milton Friedman says, all we have to care about is our shareholders, and it's all about profit, profit, profit. So many companies have always taken the view that long-term value requires a broader look. So we talked about consumers, suppliers, the community, the earth in general, all of those things, employees, all of those are stakeholders in the company, and they have to be in good shape and healthy, getting back to your grandmother from Kiev. I had a grandmother from, well, her parents anyway, were from Odessa, so I get the Ukraine connection. And then my others in their Hungarian accents and all that area. But anyway, that long-term health of all of these stakeholders is not inconsistent with the mission of companies. And what changed about a year ago is that that's exactly what the Business Roundtable said. And so they have said, you know, we are redefining what we believe is the purpose of the corporation, to account for all of these stakeholders, including shareholders. And shareholders still play a very, very important role. And in fact, these days, the institutional investors, as well as the pension funds and the, you know, sort of BlackRocks and State Streets of the world, are playing an enormous role in pushing companies from a governance, social, and environmental perspective. But with all of those things said, before everything, you know, so sort of, you know, up until February, this was all happening. And there were all of these conversations going on about what that means for companies. And companies internally were saying, you know, well, first of all, do we sign on with this thing? And if we do, how does that change the way we do business? Right. And then the COVID pandemic hit. And, you know, if we think about, you know, ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and the S includes employees, that became a big issue. So how do we keep our employees safe? How do we keep our customers safe? And then with the George Floyd killing and everything that came out in the aftermath of that, this whole reckoning of holy crap, you know, and this gets to the education piece too. You know, a lot of people have known that for their lives because of the color of their skin. And a lot of other people who have not lived in Black skin are now being educated in a way that has not really had that visceral feeling before. And that really is causing a lot of conversations. And I think the critical piece is going to be to keep it moving and to keep it real, so that, you know, I mean, virtually every company within, you know, sort of a couple of week time frame came out with beautiful statements of support. So then the question is, okay, what do you do and what's going to back up those statements? And when you look at your own workforce, your own executive team, your own board, and how you're treating your customers, you know, for example, if you're in a retail store, you know, we remember Starbucks had that issue in one of their outlets where police were called because a couple of people were sitting and having a meeting. And so all of those things that really has caused that reckoning to come and have companies say, we need to really get a closer look on this. And it gets back to that education of knowing what you don't know and making sure you do something about it.
Yeah, no, it's really, you actually answered my next question, which is fantastic. I love it. It is about all the stakeholders, and it's about listening, because and it's about being, you know, I was just I thought it was crazy when politicians would go after each other because they flip-flopped, and I never understood, if you learn something else, don't you want a person to flip-flop? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And but they both do it. They attack each other if they flip-flopped on a message. And I love the point you raised about obviously all the stakeholders, but also the one thing that's great about this is that the leaders are realizing that it is good for business. It's not something we have to do because we have to do it. It's actually good for business. And with respect to your expertise, are the boards, do you find the boards are actively engaged in that listening and that conversation?
Some are. I one of my favorite quotes, and you may know who said this. I can't remember, but it's that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
That's
So
true.
that's that's where it is there. But having said that, it is becoming more distributed. There are more and more boards that are saying, let's have a conversation about this, and let's not just talk about what the pretty disclosure document looks like. Let's talk about what's really underneath the covers and what the company is doing about it. And the one thing that I've learned also is that the only way that it's really sustainable is if it is deeply connected to the business of the company, because otherwise, budgets get tight, something happens, someone leaves, the new management comes in, and if it's not part of the company's DNA and part of how the company really sees itself as doing business, it's just that much harder to make it last.
Yeah, and you're right on all those counts. I do think it will last in the same way. I think that leaders realize they're not getting the A player talent because they don't care. That became like a big deal. Well, what's going on here? We're not getting the talent. There's got to be a reason, and they want to be taken care of in the sense of their financial well-being, their physical well-being, and their mental well-being. And it makes sense because just like a sports athlete, they'll perform and do whatever it takes for that coach that takes care of them and stands up for them. So I would hope that's what boards are doing more and more, because sometimes, and you know this better than I've found that, boards can have time to think a little bit more visionary, strategically in some respects, and support the CEO who may be so busy in keeping the business going, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And they also, they have the ability to support the CEO and say, it's okay if your profit is off a little bit this quarter because you're investing in your people. And, and we've got your back on that if that's what happens. So yeah, definitely those conversations are going on more and more.
That's a great point. If you tell a coach you're fired if you don't win this year, then next year doesn't matter. So you make a great point. If the board gives him permission, him or her permission, then it's great. Quick answer on this. I'm a graduate, let's say high school, college. I'm pissed off. No graduation. Couldn't take my girlfriend to the prom. This is like ridiculous. I can't wear my cap. And I come up to him and I say, with all this going on, what now? What next? What do you tell me?
It's all about the long term. It just use it as a learning experience and use the time wisely, which is really hard to do because we're all stuck in our homes. But that I think that's really the only thing, is to think about it in long term.
Yeah, wise words. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.